evening. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN. Woo! We're a nonprofit that presents programming exploring human development across the lifespan. I am honored to welcome you to our first event of the 2025-26 season. It's a conversation between two esteemed journalists, educators, and authors, two of our favorite people, Jeff Selingo and Frank Bruni. Thank you for joining us. FAN's YouTube channel has an archive of nearly 400 videos of past events, so be sure to subscribe to that channel to get updates when new recordings are posted. And now for some introductions. We're so thrilled to welcome back just an incredible human, Jeff Selingo, who has written about colleges and universities for more than 2.5 decades and is a New York Times bestselling author of 3 books. FAN hosted Jeff for a few events for his bestseller, Who Gets In and Why? A Year Inside College Admissions, which takes readers inside the admissions offices of 3 selective universities, and the book was named among the 100 notable books of the year by the New York Times. His new book, Dream School, is based on 2+ years of research and an original survey of 3,500 parents. You're going to hear more about it in just a minute. He's a regular contributor to The Atlantic, The Times, The Wall Street Journal, and he's a special advisor to the president and professor of practice at Arizona State University. Sorry about that. He also writes a bi-weekly newsletter on all things higher ed called Next, which is fabulous, and co-hosts the podcast Future You. Joining him, again, someone very dear to us, Frank Bruni, who has been a prominent journalist for more than 3 decades, principally at the New York Times, where his various roles have included op-ed columnist, White House correspondent, Rome bureau chief, and chief restaurant critic. He is also the author of several books, including 2024's The Age of Grievance, which became his 5th New York Times bestseller. His previous bestsellers include his memoir, The Beauty of Dusk, about his medical, emotional, and spiritual journey after a stroke in late 2017 diminished and imperiled his eyesight, and Where You Go Is Not Who You'll Be, about the college admissions mania. FAN hosted Frank for this book in 2015. In 2021, Frank became the Eugene C. Patterson Professor of the Practice of Journalism and Public Policy at Duke University, teaching media-oriented classes in the Sanford School of Public Policy. And now, with no further ado, let's welcome our dear friends Jeff Selingo and Frank Bruni to FAN.
Yes, thank you, Lonnie. Jeff, it's great to be here with you, and I want to congratulate you on the book, which I think you have an enormous turnout tonight, and I think it reflects just how many people are interested in this material, will benefit from it. Here's a look at the book. I don't know if my camera's catching that nice. I love the spiffy purple color. Was that your decision?
Yeah, it's a nice deep purple to bluish. I think they said last time yellow books tend to attract attention. Maybe now in 2025 it's more muted colors. I don't know.
I don't know. What sort of mood of the time should we read into purple being the new yellow?
Not it's not the best of times right now for higher ed, as you know.
So purple is the darker purple
Perhaps
is
it's a darker, it's not a sunny yellow, right? It's a darker evening. The sun is setting, maybe. I don't know.
We will later on. I do want to ask you a little bit
Okay.
about the political moment because I think people's college hunts, people's college decisions actually you can't disentangle them from the political moment. But I wanted to kind of start. Every book has an origin story, and I want to find out from you how you came to write this book, whether it has to do with thoughts you were having, feedback you were hearing when you did your previous book, Who Gets In and Why, because you have said to me in our kind of conversations before this, and I think you've said elsewhere, that you see this in some ways as a sequel to that book. Can you talk about its genesis and why you see it as a sequel?
So, Frank, when I started going around the country talking about the last book, Who Gets In and Why, which came out in the middle of the pandemic, but once schools and towns started to reopen, I started to do events like FAN in Chicago and a lot of schools around the country. And afterwards, I would have a lot of parents come up to me and students and some counselors and say, Jeff, it's all fine and good about how to get into these super elite schools because Who Gets In and Why was really focused on the 3 institutions where I got inside the admissions process. One being Emory, one being Davidson, 2 very selective private institutions that accept fewer than 20% of students. And then, of course, the big flagship in that book, the University of Washington, which still would be considered selective, with an acceptance rate probably at that time in the low 40s. And all these families and others would come up to me and said, well, what if we don't want to go to those types of institutions? More often, what if we can't get in? What should our backup plan be? Or what if we can't afford it? How do we make sense of the hundreds and hundreds and thousands of other colleges out there? And many of them were trying to run away from the rankings, but the rankings to them organized a very disorganized US higher education system. It at least told them direct your attention here or here if you want to go to a small liberal arts college, direct your attention at the Amherst and the Williams of the world. If you want to go to big public flagships, Carolina and Ann Arbor and Berkeley. If you want to go to elite privates, obviously the Ivies and Stanford and Northwestern, et cetera. It at least gave them that sense of direction. And their question to me was, how do we make sense of the rest of the world, especially if you're telling us to go deeper in the rankings, to widen our lens? So that was really the origin of this book. And I knew that in my mind, though, if I were to write this book on a wider system, that I would have to first persuade, change people's minds that the only colleges out there were the top 25 in the US News and World Report rankings. Because as you know, Frank, from your own work, so many, when people talk about college, when they talk about higher education, they tend to talk about the same 25, 30, 35 schools all the time.
Yes, very much the case. What one question above and beyond all others did you want this book to answer for anxious students and their parents?
I want to give them permission to think more broadly about colleges and universities than those 25 schools. And why do I say that? Because as Lonnie said, we took a survey of more than 3,000 parents for this book, and we asked them, how much does prestige matter to you? And about 16%, how important is prestige to you? And 16% said very important. How important is prestige to your kids? 27% said it was very, very important to their kids. And then that's where it got interesting because we asked how important is prestige to the people around you in your community, the prestige of a college or university. And 61% said it was important to people in their community. So much of this, as you know, is about the signaling power of an elite college education. The fact that you could put that sticker on the back of your car, more important now that kids could put on their on the school's Instagram pages. Almost all high schools now have Instagram pages that announce where they're going for college. We tend to have now these parties. We video and put it on TikTok and Instagram when their kids are making their college decisions. We turn this into an event, and so much of that is about telling people where your kids are going and wanting that approval. So that's what I want this book to answer is that it's okay. It's okay, parents, counselors, and students, to think beyond the top 25. You have permission to do that because you have permission to do that because a lot of them, and they are myths, there are a lot of myths about the success and outcomes of the highly selective colleges in the US. So you have permission to think more broadly.
I want to come back to those myths and how you would dismantle them for people. But did you trust the honesty of some of those answers when you just told me 16% of parents, oh, it's not me, it's my kid, but it's
Yes.
really not my
No, I don't, but
I'm sensing and smelling a little lack of self-awareness there, maybe, huh?
there's no doubt about it. It's self-awareness. But a lot of it is if they never had to tell anybody where their kid went, maybe that 16% is true. But the problem is they have to at some point tell somebody where their child is going. And Frank, the saddest stories that I heard during the reporting of the book, going back to those Instagram pages, were students who told me they didn't want to post where they were going to college because they were embarrassed.
Why a survey? And it's really impressive. And I want to ask you about how you did the survey. 3,000, a statistician would be super
Yep.
impressed with that number, and rightly so. Why did you decide to survey parents, not students themselves, not the high schoolers themselves?
So it's just very difficult to survey adolescents. So that's the main reason we did it. And I think a lot of this is being driven by the parents, who's a lot of our the issues that we're having with higher ed right now, our focus on the highly selectives, I think is a lot of it's driven by parents. And so I wanted to know their opinions. We did do some current college students. We were able to add a couple of questions to a survey that is included. Every student has to go through orientation, and there's a lot of programs that are, classes, online classes that students have to take as part of orientation. And I was able to persuade a company that does those online classes for hundreds and hundreds of colleges out there. We got a sample of about 300,000 undergraduates, and asked them a few questions that we found differed from how their parents thought about success, but we didn't have many questions. We had only a couple, so it was mostly around the parents.
Anyone, you know this as well as I, but anyone who goes into a book project like this has some assumptions, many assumptions, and some of them end up being correct, and some of them end up being wildly incorrect. What surprised you most in terms of the reporting you did and what you learned in the course of doing this book?
What surprised me the most was that we are having a good conversation, I think, about the value versus prestige. And what really surprised me the most was that, especially at a certain selection of what we would have considered 10, 15 years ago, and still consider, by the way, highly prestigious institutions, that many parents are saying enough is enough in terms of paying for that prestige. And so finally, I always have, in the last book, I talked often about college is about an academic fit, it's about a social fit, but it's about the third piece of fit that we don't often talk about, which is financial fit. And I think that many families over the years have stretched to pay for a certain level of prestige. And we're starting to see that not happen. There's a narrowing now of that prestige. And we see that, for example, as I point out in the book, the number of colleges that have full pay students has been decreasing dramatically over the last decade. So a Kenyon college, for example, in Ohio 10 years ago would have 60+% of their students full pay. They're now closer to 25%. They've had a huge decrease, and we've been seeing that across the board. Now, I will say that a lot of that is in the liberal arts, among the liberal arts colleges. And I think there's a couple of things happening there. And the second piece is that a lot of students now, and we see this in surveys, we see this in the freshman survey that UCLA puts out every year, the number one priority for students in picking a school or going to college is to get a job. And the perception, which I think is an incorrect perception, is that you can't get a job coming out of a liberal arts college. And so I think a lot of parents are unwilling to pay full price at those institutions. But that really surprised me, is that they're willing to pay for a certain level of prestige that usually includes the Ivies, the Ivy pluses, but that number of institutions is getting smaller and smaller every year.
I want to digress to talk about the liberal arts for a second, since you just mentioned it. They do seem to be on the decline. I mean, there were headlines recently about University of Chicago, which so prides itself on not kind of swimming with the school of fish and doing things differently. Is there not an argument to be made right now, as the job market changes, as computer science majors all of a sudden are the ones who are going most wanting for jobs? Is there not an argument to be made now more than ever before that the liberal arts are exactly the thing to do, because you're training your mind and you cannot know what the actual skills and jobs are going to be 5 years down the road?
Yeah, Frank, I would argue that that's always been the case in some ways, and probably more so now. But we've always been poor. We've always not been accurate in being able to predict what the job market is 4 or 5 years from now. And so this idea that started, 10 years ago, oh, major in STEM, it's computer science, it's all STEM degrees, it's more practical degrees, especially in healthcare, it's business degrees, go into those degrees and you're going to be guaranteed a job. No college could do that. No major is perfectly aligned to any job in the job market. So I would have always argued that the liberal arts provided the kind of thinking, the kind of critical thinking, problem solving, writing, communication, which every person who hires tells me is critically important, even more so in an age of AI, the ability to pivot when you need to in your career and job. But even more so now, the problem is that many colleges have closed or those programs, or they've just gotten a lot smaller. And liberal arts colleges now, economics, for example, at a lot of liberal arts colleges is one of the largest majors because students see that, well, if I'm going to a liberal arts college, I might as well major in the thing that's closest to business. And that to them, that's economics. And so in many ways, we kind of have passed that point of no return. I was talking to Brian Rosenberg, the former president of Macalester, and as he told me, every year you would have faculty lines open up, and you have to make a decision. Are we going to put them in, in English or philosophy, or are we going to put them in economics or new types of degrees in data analytics or data science? And that's a 30-year bet that many colleges and universities are making.
Jeff, you begin your book very intriguingly, and I mean, you have the reader right away with the story of a student named William. And William and many of the people in the audience, many of the parents and students listening to this are going to be shocked when I tell them what William did and why you began your book with William. William got into Columbia, which was his dream. It was validating. It was, it put him at the head of the pack. And then found himself not liking it at all, not feeling it was the right place, and transferring to the University of Minnesota. Now, as I said, a lot of people listening to me give that succinct summation of a story are thinking William must be insane. Tell them why he's not.
Well, so he placed his bet, early decision, on the most selective school he could get into. And that's one of the issues that I have with early decision is that we often have turned it into a game. It's not where we want to go, it's where we could get in. And the most selective institution to him was Columbia. And as he said, though, he got there and then he started to realize there were all these things he didn't look at during the college search because, again, he was so enamored with the name brand. So he gets there. He wants to get into a particular class, and his advisor says, "Well, there's a waiting list for that class that's so long that you might get into it maybe your junior or senior year." He actually did research in high school. He lived in Minnesota. He did research in high school at the University of Minnesota. So he wanted to do it in college. And he wanted to do it with a particular professor. And his advisor said, "Yeah, they don't really care about undergraduates. They're not going to work with undergraduates as in any sort of research." And then he started the core curriculum at Columbia, which he described as just kind of grinding through it. No one really enjoyed it. They just wanted to get through it. There was so much competition to get into clubs and student clubs and other extracurricular activities at Columbia. They lived in one of the greatest cities in the world, in New York, and nobody really wanted to enjoy it because it was all a competition for the next thing. Just like getting into college was a competition, now it was a competition to get into the right clubs, the right classes, the right majors, work with the right professors, and by the way, eventually the right internships and the right jobs. He was miserable. And he came home at winter break and he told his mom he wants to transfer. And a fascinating response from his mother, okay, but you have to come up with a story. You have to come up with a story to tell people because nobody transfers from Columbia. And he's right. I think 99% of students return every year, but he was intent on it and ended up transferring to the University of Minnesota. He ended up doing undergraduate research there. I asked him, he said, I found my group of friends. They're highly intellectual. They push me. I found my group of people. The professors are great. Are there some good professors and bad professors? Yes, but that's true at any institution. He didn't see as much of a difference as I think we see. The ranking, the University of Minnesota is ranked 30, 40 spots below Columbia. He didn't see the differences that we see when we look at the rankings and say, wow, there's a 10 spot difference between those schools or 20 spot difference. In reality, there's really very little difference, especially when you're not getting what you want at that top school.
So what do you want the parents and the students listening to you right now, or the ones who are going to read your book, which they should pick it up and read it. What do you want them to take away from William's story in terms of the steps they should take as they begin the college application, identifying the colleges they're going to apply to, figuring out which ones are at the top of their list of preference, not the top of their list of exclusivity? What do you want them to take away and do differently?
Well, what I don't want them to do is not apply to those places if they think they're the right fit. This is not a book that says don't apply to the highly selective, highly elite places, but know what you're getting into. All the questions, all the problems that William ended up having his first year at Columbia, he could have identified during the college search. He could have asked about what's the percentage of students in my major who have a chance to do undergraduate research. He could have talked to current undergraduates in his major about getting into these classes. He could have asked current undergraduates about the student experience at Columbia. These are all things that he could have found out during the college search, but didn't ask. He could have looked at the core curriculum, which, by the way, I think very few prospective students ever really look at the curriculum that they're going to take when they get there as an undergraduate, whether it's the core curriculum or even the curriculum in their major. I often hear from students and parents that they were surprised to find out that there was a required internship in their major, which, by the way, is a good requirement, but that the college would not provide them any help in getting that internship. Again, these are all things that are available to you as a prospective student. You're just not asking them because you're either enamored by all the bells and whistles during the college tour, or you're enamored, like William was, with the name brand, and it was all about getting in. That's all that was important to him.
It sounds to me, and for all the right reasons, like you're asking students and parents to do more work and a different kind of work when they're going through the college application process. Does that not carry the danger of actually increasing their anxiety if figuring out the right college becomes an even bigger part of their junior and senior year?
It does, and it's funny, Frank, that you said that because my editor, when he read, we read the first draft, that was his takeaway. You're asking people to do an awful lot, and I say early on, I I have a lot of lists and ideas and suggestions and advice throughout the book. But as I say very early on, first of all, there is no easy button to press here for the college search, but it is like working out at the gym. If you go every day, for every week, every month, you're going to be in great shape. But that doesn't mean that you're going to be in terrible shape if you only go 1 day a week or 2 days a week. And so, even if you do a little bit of this work, if you do all of it, yes, it will take a lot of time and it might raise your anxiety. But even if you do a few of the things that I'm suggesting in this book, when you go, especially when you go on a college tour, when you ask questions or compare institutions, you will be better off than not doing anything at all.
Um, I want to talk about one other kind of complicated or mixed message. So the book is called Dream School, and I want you, as you kind of give an answer to this, to tell us why that phrase and what you mean by it. But I have often worried and written about the fact that we give this message, and it's a big source of the anxiety, that where you go to school and making that decision correctly will transform your life, that there's some magical fairy dust that is spread on you in college as in no other chapter and no other place of your life. And when I see Dream School, I wonder, is that actually kind of um, deepening that impression? That's not what you mean to do.
No.
You mean with Dream School to challenge the idea that there's a magical school for you, right? I want to understand how to reconcile those things.
Yeah, I mean, it's a play a little bit on this idea that we have a single dream school. I think that when we think of the idea of dream school, we think of it as a single place, a single institution. I want to go to Duke University, or it's a type of institution. I want to go to an Ivy League institution. I want to go to a school in the SEC. I want to go to a big football school, right? So we think of it as a collection or a single institution. And I told you I would not read from the book, Frank, tonight, but I do want to read this passage in the beginning because I think it does explain
I invited you to
why I
read.
did this.
I
Yes,
invited
well,
you to read from the
and
book.
now I'm going to. So
Yeah.
very quickly. So why did I call this book Dream School if I'm suggesting there's no such thing? Because the dream isn't about a single name or a universally understood brand like the Ivy League. It's about finding a place where you can thrive, learn, and become the person you're meant to be. It's about considering a range of colleges that fit both your personality and how you like to learn. Do you want a small college? Do you want a small school in a college town, an urban university with ample city life, or a big public flagship where football on Saturday and Greek life are the main attractions? What about academics? Do you want a pressure cooker like William experienced at Columbia, where every day felt like a competition, or more of a balanced vibe like he found at Minnesota? To me, the dream is finding that fit. To me, it's your dream, not somebody else's dream, not somebody else's ideal of a dream school, but it's about your dream and your dream school, about how that fits in. And so it's really a play on that idea, And it's obviously, as you know, book titles are meant to attract people's attention, and hopefully that it does that.
So if I am the parent of a high school student beginning junior year, or I'm a high school student beginning junior year, I am now turning my attention, because Lord knows I can't wait till senior year, toward where I might apply to college. Take me through. Maybe this is your kid. It's your kid
Yeah,
who's beginning
yeah.
his or her junior year. Take me through the first five things that student should do to do this the right way and to end up at the right school.
Well, the first thing is let's stop putting names on a list. I think in many ways, students start the college search almost in the middle of it by starting to put names they recognize from the ticker on the bottom of ESPN on Saturdays, names they hear in their neighborhood, stickers they see on the back of cars. By the way, names they see on Naviance and Score. Many high schools out there use this software in their high school counseling offices. And the most popular feature of this software are these scattergrams, which you will say, okay, here's my SAT or ACT score, here's my GPA. Let me know where people from my previous students from my high school got in or got waitlisted or got rejected. Research has shown that those programs actually narrow the field of vision for most students. And so as a result, we start out by thinking there are only 30 or 35 schools, which, by the way, everybody in your high school and your community is also applying to. So I always encourage people, the first thing you should do within an hour or 2 hours of your home, most likely, I live in the suburbs of DC. I could go to the University of Maryland and see what a big public flagship is like. I could go down to Georgetown or George Washington and see what an urban private institution is like. I could go a couple hours north. I could go to Dickinson College. I could go to Franklin and Marshall College and see what a more rural liberal arts college is like. Get a feel for what these different types of institutions are like before you even think about their names. You might say, well, I have no intention of going to the University of Maryland. It's not about that. I understand schools are distinctive, but I've been on hundreds of campuses in my 25 years of covering higher ed. A public flagship, similar, right? Different colors, different mascots, different sizes, but they do have a similar feel, and that's what you want to get. So that's the first thing that you want to do. Then you want to get a sense of, how do I like to learn? Think about your high school experience. Do you want small classes, bigger classes? How often are you interacting with faculty members? So think a little bit about how do you thrive in high school and how that matches to a college that you might be considering. Think about major if you do have a major idea. And I always tell people you don't need to know what you want to do. I have a 16-year-old at home, and she's very concerned that she doesn't know what she wants to do. That's all fine and good. It's okay. Most of us don't even know what we want to do, 30 or 40 years later. So there you want to look at places where you're going to be able to get into a college that has a variety of majors that you don't, a lot of colleges now are having you pick a major at the point of application. And that sometimes worries students that that's the reason they have to have a major. So look at places that have a variety of majors where you're able to transfer. So those are the first couple of things to do, particularly that junior year. But the biggest one, Frank, is let's not start putting the names on that list immediately. Think about what you want out of the experience. Think about the types of places that you like first before you start putting those names down.
It makes a lot of sense, but at some point, I need to collapse my list. One of the reasons so many students and parents begin with the known entities is because there's an infinity of options out there and they've got to shrink them down. Once I've done the kind of research you've talked about and I realize it's the large state school that is the environment that I think is going to be right for me, or it's the tiny liberal arts college with the very verdant quadrangle, how do I then collapse the universe of possibility into the schools I'm going to apply to? Because even with the Common App, that can't be more than X number of schools. It's just not
Right.
manageable.
Well, and I think the issue with collapsing is the types of schools that you're putting on that smaller list. And I want to make a point here because in many ways, we are starting, and I'm going to contradict myself about something I just said, because if you look at the data, I asked Niche. So Niche is another platform where students can pick colleges and put them on the list. And I asked Niche, you know, tell me a little bit about how the college search for students changes over their sophomore and junior year. And one of the things that Niche told me is that actually there is a broad, sophomores and juniors have a broader set of institutions on their list. And then as they get into their senior year, they start to narrow it. Now that makes sense because they're moving into the application process. But as they start to narrow it, they also move up the rankings at the same time. In other words, they're collecting more selective schools. They're copycatting more of the schools that they already have on their list. Instead of having a balanced list, they have an unbalanced list. And why is that? Often I found through my reporting is they get their junior year grades and they get their SAT and ACT scores. We know there's grade inflation in high school, and they get their SAT and ACT scores, and they may do very well on the ACT and SAT. And so they have this overconfidence bias that then leads them to add more of the same types of schools. And that's really a lot of the problem here with the growth in applications over the last couple of years, Frank, is that as I note in the book, especially at the most selective colleges, the number of applications at the most selective colleges have tripled over the last 20 years, even though they've kept the size of their class the same.
They are, as they become overconfident, to use your word, they are applying to ever more exclusive schools. They're going to those schools with a low acceptance rate. You mentioned earlier the myth that those schools would guarantee them a much brighter future than another kind of school. As you know, I wrote a whole book about that. I'm going to ask you some advanced questions from audience members in a second. One of the questions that I got, and there were various versions of it, was I don't believe that. One questioner even said, Frank, have you become convinced since your book by all the evidence that selective schools, in fact, do give students a bigger leg up than was thought? I'm not familiar with all that evidence and I would dispute it, but I want to hear from you, Jeff, because you go into this in the book and it's such a crucial question for people. To what extent is it true that going to a school with a 5% acceptance rate is going to be a gift and a boon? And to what extent is that just a load of horseshit?
Okay, so I'm going to approach it from two different points of view, Frank. First, in the student experience as an undergraduate, and then in the outcomes. On page 141, I'm going to try to show this, a great chart. So I asked NSSE, the National Survey of Student Engagement, surveys freshmen and seniors at 900 colleges every year. Unfortunately, they don't release the results of those surveys. They release them to the schools. So you can ask the school you're looking at if they participate in the National Survey of Student Engagement and see if you can see the results. And this survey is a very comprehensive survey about, what activities they participate in, how often they study, how often they talk to professors. It's a very comprehensive survey out of Indiana University. And so I asked them, okay, they wouldn't give me the individual results of schools, but I said, if I send you a file of 1,200 schools sorted by selectivity, would you match them up with your 900 schools? And we look at how does a highly selective school compare with a less selective school? And so they did that. So we sorted their 900 schools into 5 buckets of selectivity. So the most selective schools that accept fewer than 20% of students, 20 to 40%, 40 to 60, and so on. And then we looked at the differences in student engagement and student satisfaction. First of all, student satisfaction, pretty similar across the board. Most selective, least selective. Higher order learning, which is really what everybody wants. This idea of, extent to which courses emphasize critical and analytical thinking. Now, highly selective schools, the most selective schools came out on top, but there wasn't a statistically significant difference between the top and the less selective schools. The one that really was not surprising to me, but I think would be surprising to most people, student-faculty interaction. Highly selective schools actually ended up on the bottom there. Now, again, not by much. It wasn't statistically different, but that means that less selective colleges, you actually have more student-faculty interaction. I would be kind of curious about what you see at Duke, because I think that just like William experienced at Columbia, at many big research universities, this is not true of all faculty, but a lot of faculty are there for their research and their graduate students, not undergraduates. And I think that the undergraduate experience suffers sometimes at these big elite research universities. You could tell me I'm wrong on that since you teach at one later on. But so it was fascinating to me that there were so many, when it comes to the student experience, that there's a lot more similarities between these schools than we care to admit. So that's on the student experience. Anyway, I'll pause there. You were going to say something?
Well, I was going to point out, and I'm sure I'm in the heads of a lot of the parents listening right now and some of the students. I was going to point out something you didn't mention. You talked about their satisfaction with the school, what they think they got out of it. What a lot of parents and students are thinking, yes, but how much money were they making 10 years later? They're not talking when they think about a 5% acceptance rate school as a great advantage. They're talking about the alumni network. I'm just telling you what they'd say. And they're talking about how high that career is going to go in the future. If we're using that marker, that yardstick, is there an argument for the more selective exclusive school?
So this is a very good question. I had an excerpt of the book in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend using research that David Deming has done with Opportunity Insights, Raj Chetty's group at Harvard. And there's the finding there is, as he says, if you go to a highly elite school, you're going to get 2 lottery tickets in the game of life. If you go to other schools, you're going to get 1 lottery ticket. Now, getting 2 lottery tickets doesn't guarantee you have a better chance of ending up in the 1%, but it doesn't guarantee you ending up in the 1%. And I think what ends up happening is when we talk about the outcomes of highly selective schools, we tend to look at the outliers. We tend to over index on the outliers. And really, when you think about the averages of the highly selective schools along with everyone else, there's a lot more similarities. And for example, if you look at the data in the national, in the student scorecard, which is a federal government website, which collects outcomes 5 and 10 years later, what you're going to see in there is there differences among more selective and less selective colleges, yes, but it's not as big as we think. Might be a couple $1,000s. There's more differences, by the way, by major. So a lot of it depends on what you major in at these schools. And if you major in computer science, you're actually going to do just as well at less selective schools as at more selective schools because the major matters more than the school in that case. But I did work on this with Matt Singelman at the Burning Glass Institute, which looks at job outcomes in real time, Frank. And the third thing, so, selectivity matters and major matters to outcomes, no doubt about it. But skills matter as well. In other words, if you have the skills that are in demand by employers, which, by the way, you could get at a multitude of schools, depending on where you intern and depending on what courses you take in and out of school, that also matters. And so that's something that you can control. Maybe you can't get into Duke. Maybe you can't major in what you really want to major in at NC State, but you can potentially get these internships and these skills that are in demand by employers, and that will help you in the long run.
Isn't there something else feeding the myth, or I've always thought so, but you have studied this so much more closely than I have. And so I want you to correct me if I'm wrong or say something about this if you agree with me. We look at these big, big careers and these spectacular successes of people who graduate from Harvard or Columbia or Yale, in part because that fits our stereotype. But we never ask the question whether the school had that catalytic effect or whether the kind of person who from childhood aims for Yale, Harvard, and Columbia sees himself or herself as belonging there and has the network of associations that make that school part of their vocabulary. Are we just seeing a validation of a trajectory that was taking place anyway, or are we seeing the school really kind of lend some accelerator effect?
Well, I think there is a little bit. I think it's a little bit of both. Clearly, a lot of this is up to the student, and the research has shown that. But that means, by the way, that student can also do well, right? It's the big fish in the small pond theory at less selective schools, where the schools really do make a difference, where the more selective schools do make a difference, is in kind of the network effect and the alumni effect that they have. And at the end of the day, this goes back to learning and student engagement. What you're really buying at a lot of these highly selective schools is the network. And that I won't deny that does supercharge many careers in some fields, but it doesn't necessarily, as David Deming, and you'll enjoy this analogy, Frank, as David Deming told me, you go to Harvard, you could work at the New York Times. You go to Ohio State, you could work at the Columbus Dispatch. Right? A lot of this is about national and regional brands as well.
That's fair. Yeah. I want to go to a couple of audience registrant questions that came in before the event. And this one is sort of Venn diagram overlap with what we've been talking about. Brian H. from Wayland, Massachusetts asks, for schools that have a higher acceptance rate, should I be concerned the caliber of student is lower and it might affect the overall quality of education? Is the level of motivation correlated to higher stats?
So first of all, a higher acceptance rate does not necessarily mean all the time lower stats because many colleges, one of the things I point out in the book is that the yield rates of almost all colleges, except for the most selective colleges, have gone down. In other words, colleges have to accept more and more students now to yield the same number of students that they yield 20 years ago. Now, one of the things is that when you yield students, you don't know if you're yielding your top stats students. Obviously, most colleges are trying to do that, or your bottom stats students. As I point out in the book, if that is a concern of yours, what you then want to look for are the smaller cohorts of students. So this goes back to William's story when he transferred from Columbia to University of Minnesota. As he said, he had to find his people. And that could include within a major, that could include in an honors college, within a big state university, that could include clubs. It is going to be harder to find, the top students at a much bigger place, at a less selective place, but it doesn't mean they don't exist. They're everywhere in the water at a place like Harvard and Yale. But I would also argue, by the way, and I don't know if you want to say anything about this because you teach at a highly selected place, is that even at the highly selected places, there are going to be students there that somebody might say, how did they get in?
No, I mean, I will say, and I want to say it just because it should be a reassurance to parents and students who make the mistake of feeling like some objective judgment, some verdict has been handed down by which schools accepted and rejected them. I've been teaching at Duke for 4 years. I think for all of those years, our acceptance rate has been below 6%. I think it may be below 5% now. And I have extraordinary students in every class I've taught. And in every class I've taught, at least a third of the students, I'm confused about how they got in. I may not know things about the instrument they play or how much money some grandparent gave, but they are proof to me that there's a lottery aspect to this, that there are students who just happen to have the kind of personal profile that is something the university is looking for at that moment in time. And it is not anything approaching an objective verdict on your potential or your talent or your intellect. And I just think students and parents need to know that so they don't draw the wrong conclusions and get discouraged if when the yeses and nos come in, they don't come in exactly the way that was hoped for. Does that jibe with the reporting you've done in
Yeah, and
your
I
own?
mean, as you know, I was inside these admissions offices a couple of years ago, and one of the things I noticed is that a lot of this is trying to make guesses on how these students are going to perform years later. And you're looking at an application, usually in 8 or 10 minutes, and trying to make that judgment. And by the way, as John Ladding, the dean of admissions at Emory, will say, all the pieces of the application can be gamed now. You could get test prep. There's grade inflation. You could have help with your essay. So you really don't know at the end of the day who you're actually accepting. And by the way, every college, including the Dukes of the world, I think their yield rate is 60%, which means that 40% of students are saying no to them. And you don't know what set of students you're accepting will say no or yes. You can make guesses about that, but you never quite know. And Frank, I just want to go back to this network effect because yes, the highly elites have broader and deeper networks than other schools, but every school has a network in some way, and you can't forget that. I went to a not selective college. I went to Ithaca College in upstate New York, and I was very proud I was at graduation back in May to see Bob Iger, who's the CEO of Disney, get an honorary degree. And the person who presented to them was my college roommate, David Muir, who's anchor of ABC World News, right? So here is tiny little Ithaca College, and we have the CEO of Disney and the top-rated news anchor on network television, in the same room. So there are these stories, as you know from your work on in your book, there are these stories at every college. Are there more of them at Harvard and Yale and Duke? Yes, but that doesn't mean they don't exist in other places.
I want to ask a couple other audience questions. Transferring has come up a couple of times, including when we were talking about the opening anecdote of the book with William. Lee Ann from, and I'm not going to get this town's name pronounced correctly, Lee Ann from Dahlonega, Georgia. My apologies to Dahlonega, Georgia. Asks this, transfer students often get overlooked in admission process books and articles. How does the admission acceptance process differ for transfer students? Should they think about the process of selecting a new school differently than freshman applicants do? And I would add to that, Jeff, how do you feel about transferring in general? Do students consider it and do it often enough or not, or more often than they should?
Sometimes I think they don't do it when they should. By the way, we know this from the data at highly selective colleges. The work of Howard Gardner and Wendy Fishman at Harvard have found that students at highly selective colleges are less likely to transfer if they're not happy or they have a bad fit. Because again, like William, they think they won a lottery and they have to keep that ticket at all costs. And there's no reason why you should stay if it's not the right fit. By the way, that right fit you should determine many months into your first year, not a couple of days. I am a little disturbed, by the way, Frank. I'm in a lot of parent groups, and parents were saying on day 2 of their son or daughter's freshman year, just a couple of weeks ago, oh my God, they called, they're unhappy. How do we transfer? So give them a little bit more time than the first week of school. But when you're looking to transfer, then try to figure out, by the way, what you don't like about the current school that you're at. Just don't take the same flavor or a different flavor of the same type of school. You really want to know, well, what don't I like about this place, and look at something that's very different. Again, like William did, he knew exactly what he didn't like about Columbia, knew what he could get at the University of Minnesota, and then you want to look at how many transfer students they actually take. Many colleges don't take many transfer students every year at all. You could find that out through the common data set. So if you Google a college, Duke University common data set, you will find out how many transfer students and applications they get every year. If they get a lot of applications and take few transfer students, that means it's just as hard to get into there as a transfer as it would have been as a first year student.
Does it tend to be just as hard or harder, or are there schools and cases in which it is in fact easier because the pool of applicants is smaller?
Um, it tends to track with the first year students. So, in other words, the most selective colleges are just as hard to get in as transfers. And especially, by the way, the more selective colleges now have been looking to community colleges in particular to look for transfer students. They're trying to diversify their student body base. And so they're going to be looking in places that we probably would not imagine going to ourselves necessarily. I'm a big fan of community colleges, but I think that question might have been directed as I'm already at a 4-year college. I want to transfer to another 4-year college.
You mentioned diversify, which obviously brings to mind the word diversity, and I do want to kind of acknowledge the current political context. Schools have been told they can no longer practice what we often call affirmative action. But it's not just that. I mean, we have an administration right now. We have a moment when people are banging on elite institutions as never before. I have many Jewish friends who are telling their kids, "This is a school I do not want you to look at. This is a school I do." How are all the things that are going on in terms of the national mood under Trump, in terms of the Trump administration? How are they changing, if at all, the kinds of schools students are looking at and parents are looking at, and the admission process itself?
Well, it's bringing more uncertainty to the admissions process. Don't mean to pick on Duke, but this just happened a couple of weeks ago where they kept open their waiting list longer than they normally would, and they invited students off the waiting list in late July. They took 50 students off the waiting list. And why is that significant? In late July, those students were already enrolled somewhere else. They might have had orientation, they might have had a roommate somewhere else, and now Duke said, "Hey, you want to come?" And why did Duke say that? Because they're likely expecting fewer international students this year. And Duke, and like a lot of major research universities, are also under a lot of financial pressure right now because of cuts to federal research and cuts in overhead rates to federal research. So I think overall, Frank, this brings a lot of uncertainty when you're a Jewish student and trying to figure out, is this a safe campus for me? Is this a campus? If I'm an international student, is this a good fit for me? Can I get a visa? I think the same thing is true of domestic students who are trying to figure out, well, if they're expecting fewer international students, does that mean they're going to take more domestic students? I think it just adds more uncertainty to a process that has been very uncertain since COVID.
And we don't know yet what the fruit of that uncertainty will be, right?
We don't know. It's very early. Even on international students, we really won't know for the next couple of weeks whether these students are able to show up because they were able to get a visa or not. We don't really know what the long-term impacts of these research cuts will be on the bottom line of these elite universities. And we don't even know. I mean, one of the things I'm concerned about is because this is an administration that can't seem to keep deals, is that even when you hold a deal and get $50 million from Brown or a couple $100 million from Columbia, what stops them from coming back a year from now and saying, okay, not good enough. We want more money from you.
Well, and it's an unfinished story. Harvard just won in court today, so we don't even know where
We
that's
don't
going.
even know where that, right.
Something I don't hear people talking about much, but actually one of the smart audience members sent it in as a question. We talk about international students in terms of those who can no longer come here, either can't get their visas or aren't feeling comfortable. Is this a moment in time when parents and students should think more than in the past about going abroad to college? What would you say about that?
So this has definitely been an increase in the number of American students going overseas. It's still a tiny number, by the way, and mostly they're going to English-speaking countries. So the Canada is very popular, the UK is very popular, the Netherlands are very popular. I mean, one of the things there are two things that are attractive, I think, to American parents. One is in many of these other countries, it's very transparent about what it takes you to get in. And this is what parents like, right? American admissions, particularly at the highly selective institutions, is a black box that you can't see inside of. Where at these other institutions, they say, here's what you need. And if you have this, you're going to get in. And parents like that. Second, it's not as expensive as we tend to think it is. First of all, in many of these places, you can use federal financial aid from the US. At these and you have to double check at some of these institutions, but at many of these institutions you can. The dollar could be to your advantage in many places. Some of these degrees are shorter; they might only be 3-year degrees, and overall they're less expensive to begin with. Now, yes, you have travel, and I think some students are reluctant to do it because they think it won't provide the American college experience to them, and it is. It's a different student experience, but I think that this is something we're going to see more of over the next couple of years.
We're going to run out of time in just a little bit, and I have a gazillion more questions for you that I won't get to, but thank you for being so eloquent and answering so fully the ones I've asked. I want to mention a personal bugaboo, get your reaction to it in terms of the pursuit of a dream school. When we talk about fit, you talk in the book about a sense of belonging. I think most people here, I want to find a place where I'm going to be comfortable. And one of my kind of personal bits of evangelism is I would like to see more students find places where they're going to be uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable.
I
Yes.
think I think education happens when you're uncomfortable, when you are coloring outside the lines of what you knew before, when you are in circumstances that are unlike any you have managed and navigated before, so that you can discover new skills and realize you have strengths that you didn't. Meet the kinds of people you haven't met before. How do you agree to any extent with that? And how in the dream school process do you encourage students and parents to do the very counterintuitive thing and seek out discomfort?
Well, and I think that's true, Frank. And I think both things could be true at the same time. Belonging to me is the ability for students to be seen by somebody, whether it's a faculty member, whether it's a mentor, a staff member, or other students, that you can find some of your people there who understand your lived experiences. I think that could be true at the same time that you could be at a place that encourages disagreement, that encourages dialogue about differences. I think that both of those things can be true at the same time. And I agree with you that that's the way the world works. And that's the world that many of these students are going to work in so eventually someday. And they're better off doing that now in college. The problem is that colleges are moving away from that, and students want to find a place where they feel safe. And safe to me is a different word, not physically safe, but that they feel that their views are safe. And whether that's conservatives or liberals or moderates, that you want to be able to express your feelings where no one else will disagree with you. And that to me worries me. That to me is not my definition of belonging in the book, by the way.
It's not the real world. And I was correct in my read of the clock. Lonnie is back. I will let you take the microphone from us.
Frank, thanks so much for just a super solid interview. We appreciate your time and energy tonight. Jeff as well, great conversation, lots of questions in the Q&A. And of course, as you know, almost 90 questions submitted ahead of time. Hot topic, no surprise. Want to remind folks, Jeff is going to join us at After Hours. After Hours will be another 30-minute Zoom right after this one. You can get access to After Hours, make a donation at any dollar amount to FAN, and we'll send you the join link for that. We're going to do that as a lightning round, fast questions. Don't come with 7 questions. You get 1 question, and we're going to try to get to as many of them as we can. Jeff is excellent at After Hours. I've seen him do it many times. I want to go with one question. We're at 7:59, and actually, Frank Bruni, this question is going to you, and it was the most upvoted question. So it's not even dealer's choice here.
No pressure.
It's from Chris, and Chris says, once we're done with college questions, what's Frank's recommendation in red wines when dealing with the admissions process?
Well, I'm drinking a delicious Pinot Noir from New Zealand that I actually carried back with me from a trip there. I would encourage people. I often thought of New Zealand wines as being sort of on the cheap end of the menu, but they make some amazing wines. So think about a New Zealand Pinot.
Very good. Straight from Frank's mouth. Thank you. Watch the sales go up. 8 p.m. We are done and out of here. Frank, we hope to welcome you back to Fanland. Let's not make it 10 years, okay? Let's sooner. We'll work on that. Jeff, we'll see you in 3 minutes. You have a very fast turnaround. Everybody, for coming to After Hours, hurry up. It's going to be quick. Thanks for coming tonight, and we'll see you again on Zoom on the 17th of September. Thanks, everybody. And have a
Thanks,
great
everybody.